So I want you to picture this. Uruguay's digital identity database just leaks.
Right, a massive leak.
Yeah, exactly. We are talking about 8 gigabytes of highly sensitive citizen data. So national ID numbers, emails, home addresses, just dumped onto the open web.
It's basically a monumental national crisis at that point.
A complete nightmare.
Okay.
But then, within a matter of days, the government proudly steps up to the podium and they announce they've captured the mastermind behind the entire operation.
Which is pretty fast for a cyber investigation.
Right. And they say it's this 18-year-old kid named Vlady. And the authorities claim they cracked the case because a rival hacker gang tipped them off.
Yeah, tip them off.
So the press runs with it, the panic subsides, and the state secures this massive public relations victory. Basically, case closed.
I mean, it's a remarkably convenient narrative arc, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
It provides this immediate resolution, it places a really concrete face on a complex digital threat, and it assures the public that, hey, the state's enforcement mechanisms are working flawlessly.
Right. But according to the stack of sources we are diving into today, that neatly packaged official story starts to look more like a meticulously constructed mirage.
Yeah, the evidence points in a very different direction.
Exactly. We have raw, unedited audio from the actual hackers involved, plus deep forensic analysis from cybersecurity experts Alberto Daniel Hill.
And we can't forget the leaked internal dark web chats from the attacking group itself.
Right, and the picture they paint is entirely different. So today, we are completely deconstructing this teenager's arrest.
We're going to explore the gap between, political crisis management and actual digital forensics.
Because it is a huge gap. And we're going to parse out the difference between digital vandalism and actual cyber terrorism.
Which is a distinction that often gets lost in the panic, right?
Absolutely. And why should you care about a teenager in Uruguay? Because if the sources are accurate, the way these concepts are being conflated here has massive implications for how any nation handles its vulnerable infrastructure.
And by extension, how your own digital identity is protected or, exposed.
Exactly. So let's start with the official narrative, which was reported by outlets like El Observador. It relies heavily on this idea of a gang war.
Yeah, the gang war angle. The authorities arrested this 18-year-old who operated under aliases like Uruguayo 1337 or Garo.
Right.
And they basically crowned him the architect of this whole thing, PampaLeaks. And the catalyst for his capture, according to the state, was a tip from a rival faction named Ex-Presidents.
Which immediately raises major red flags for anyone familiar with the dark web ecosystem.
Oh, massive red flags.
Because the underground economy, it operates on strict, verifiable codes of reputation, right?
Yeah, it's all about reputation.
Like initial access brokers, ransomware affiliates, even hacktivist collectives, they all have historical footprints. You can track their wallets, their forum posts, previous dumps.
They want to be known in those circles.
Exactly. But when independent investigators, including Alberto Daniel Hill, went looking for ex-presidents, they found absolutely zero trace. I mean, no historical operations, no reputation, no chatter. They simply don't exist in the established threat landscape.
Right, the sudden appearance of a fully formed rival hacker group that is also perfectly willing to act as an informant, it's highly anomalous.
It's way too convenient.
Yeah. Hill's analysis, which corroborates other independent investigators, suggests that ex-presidents is likely just a smokescreen.
Like a completely fabricated entity.
Basically, yeah. The prevailing theory in our sources is that this was either a media invention fed to reporters to just streamline the narrative, or an intelligence operation designed to justify an arrest.
Right, justify the arrest without actually having to present rigorous forensic proof.
Exactly. By claiming a tip-off, authorities bypass the need to explain complex digital forensics, which, honestly, they might not have even possessed.
And they replace it with a simple, easily digestible story of, thieves turning on each other.
It plays great on the evening news.
It really does. But while the government was spinning this whole gang war narrative, the actual internal communications from PampaLeaks were leaking out.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, we have a transcript from May 20th, 2026 involving Hill and a main operator from PampaLeaks known as Pampa.
Right, the actual person behind the leaks.
Yeah. And the contrast between the state's claim and the attacker's own words is just staggering. Pampa explicitly states, and I'm quoting directly from the leak here, "The justice system put him in prison for things I did."
Wow, it is a rare moment of candor in this kind of environment. Pampa is actively disavowing Vlady's role as a mastermind.
Right, he's basically saying, you got the wrong guy for the big crime.
Yeah, and he goes further. Pampa writes, he just hacked dynasia.gov.ui with me to get attention.
Okay, so Dynasia being the National Directorate of Civil Aviation and Aeronautical Infrastructure.
Right. Pampa is essentially framing this teenager as a clout chaser who participated in a minor website defacement, not the architect of an 8-gigabyte national data exfiltration.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. It sounds like the police couldn't catch the actual bank robbers.
Okay, yeah.
So they arrested the teenager who spray-painted the bank's wall the day before, just to have a suspect to parade on TV.
That is actually a perfect analogy. Pampa notes that Vlady and his associates were completely unprepared to face a coordinated governmental response. They were just operating for notoriety.
They were just being loud online.
Exactly. And according to Hill's reading of the situation, the state was facing a catastrophic reputation crisis. I mean, they needed a culprit to stop the bleeding in the press.
So they grabbed the loudest, most exposed target they could find. Because according to the raw audio from another hacker in our sources, who goes by Gob or gov.eth, Vlady was already heavily doxed.
Oh, yeah, his OPSE was terrible.
I mean, his real identity, his face, even his car were known within certain online circles.
Right, he was terrible at operational security. When a state apparatus is under immense pressure to produce a result, an 18-year-old with poor OPSE is basically the path of least resistance.
It's an easy win for them.
Totally. Our sources argue he was the perfect scapegoat. Just a highly visible body to put in a cell to satisfy public demand for justice, regardless of whether he actually possessed the technical capability to execute the massive data breach.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of what Vlady and his friends are actually accused of doing.
Yeah.
Because even if he wasn't the mastermind of PampaLeaks, he was still active.
They were definitely doing things.
Right. So let's look at the breach of the tourism company, Bukibus. Because Gob actually details their methodology in the leaked Twitter Space audio.
And this is fascinating because it wasn't some sophisticated zero-day exploit.
Not at all. Gob states they relied entirely on an OSINT aggregator called Intellex, or Intelligence X.
Right, which is a critical point in understanding the nature of the threat here.
Can you break down Intellex for us?
Yeah.
Like, without getting too bogged down in the jargon?
Sure, yeah. So Intellex indexes massive amounts of leaked data. If an employee at a target company gets compromised by a standard info stealer malware, their browser credentials are eventually bundled up and dumped online. Intellex simply aggregates these dumps, making them totally searchable.
So it's essentially just a search engine for compromised credentials.
Exactly. You query a target domain, and it returns any associated usernames and passwords that have already been exposed in previous unrelated breaches.
Wow. And Gob explicitly states that this was their entry vector for Bukibus. They didn't breach the network architecture or do any crazy coding.
No, they literally just queried Intellex, found a working password for the Bukibus content management system, logged in, and defaced the front page.
They just changed the look of the website.
Yeah, they bypassed the security perimeter entirely because the perimeter was already compromised by a third party, and the victim organization hadn't even noticed or rotated their keys.
That is wild, and this leads to a really crucial distinction raised in the sources by a Mexican cybersecurity commentator named Hector.
Yes, Hector makes a very strong point here.
He argues forcefully against conflating a website defacement with a data exfiltration event.
Because they are completely different things.
Right. Hector points out that altering the HTML of a public-facing landing page to display a mocking message, that's digital graffiti. It is illegal, obviously, but it is fundamentally different from persisting in a network, locating sensitive databases, and quietly exfiltrating gigabytes of citizen data.
Exactly. Hector actually recounts a precedent in Mexico where authorities attempted to charge a 14-year-old with cyber espionage for a simple HTML defacement of a government site.
A 14-year-old. Cyber espionage.
Yeah. The prosecution treated the incident as a theft of confidential state secrets rather than just unauthorized access to a public web server.
That's completely disproportionate.
And Gob makes the exact same argument regarding Vlady. He insists they didn't steal or publish any databases from Bukibus, yet Vlady is facing multiple charges of hacking major institutions like the Ministry of Social Development and the Ministry of Public Health.
Okay, but I do want to push back on this a little bit, because Gob admits to another element of Vlady's operation that goes way beyond just HTML defacement.
You're talking about the Telegram bot.
Yes, the Telegram bot. According to Gob, Vlady built this bot where a user could input a citizen's DNI their national identification number, and it would just return their personal data.
Right.
Now, Gob claims they didn't hack the official government servers for this. They didn't breach the Urinaper in Argentina or the equivalent in Uruguay.
Right. They didn't hit the mainframes.
Instead, they found leaked API keys or credentials for commercial database services, specifically citing a platform called InfoExperto.
That is correct. They utilized that same Intellex methodology to find working logins for private companies that aggregate and sell commercial background reports.
But, I mean, even if the entry point was a leaked API key for a commercial vendor, rather than a direct breach of a government mainframe, building an automated tool to scrape and distribute private citizen data on demand via Telegram, that is a massive privacy violation.
No, undoubtedly.
It's not just digital graffiti at that point.
Right.
It's the weaponization of OSINT at scale. I
Yeah.
mean, we can't just dismiss that as a harmless prank just because the target left the door unlocked, right?
No, that is a very valid distinction, and it's one that the sources themselves actually acknowledge. Automating illicit access to commercial databases is absolutely a crime.
Right.
It violates data protection laws, and it clearly constitutes unauthorized access. The argument presented by Hector and Hill, however, is one of proportionality and accurate attribution.
Meaning the punishment doesn't fit the actual crime.
Exactly. The state is not prosecuting Vlady solely for illicitly accessing a commercial API. They are portraying him as the architect of the PampaLeaks national database exfiltration.
They're pinning the whole 8-gigabyte leak on him.
Yes. They are charging him with cyber terrorism based on the automation of publicly available or previously compromised data.
So what does this all mean for the charges? If they are basically just picking up lost keys and opening unlocked doors, why are they being charged like cyber terrorists?
Well, that brings us directly to the forensics, or honestly, the lack thereof.
Right, because when the state announced the arrest, they presented it as this huge triumph of digital tracking.
They made it sound very sophisticated, but Hill's analysis of the investigation suggests it was incredibly superficial, relying heavily on IP bouncing misconceptions.
Okay, IP bouncing. Can you explain how that works in this context?
Sure. So IP attribution is notoriously difficult. Sophisticated threat actors do not connect directly to their targets.
They hide their tracks.
Right? They route traffic through multiple proxy layers, often utilizing vulnerable, poorly secured local infrastructure as jump nodes or exit points.
So if the actual operators of PampaLeaks compromised local Uruguayan servers like the Bukiba servers and used them as proxies to execute their attacks,
then the state investigators would just see the traffic coming from those local nodes.
Ah, I see.
Precisely.
Right.
And if a less sophisticated actor like Vlady is also utilizing that exact same poorly secured local infrastructure for his own minor operations,
Like the digital graffiti.
exactly, then his digital footprint is going to be present on those same servers.
Oh, wow. So they just saw his IP on the server and assumed he did everything.
Basically. Hill emphasizes a fundamental rule of digital forensics. An IP address does not equal a physical person.
Right.
Relying on shared proxy infrastructure as definitive proof of intellectual authorship for a massive exfiltration is just a massive logical leap.
And Hector brings up a fascinating legal complication regarding jurisdiction that the state seems to have completely ignored here.
Yeah, the cloud hosting issue.
Right. He points out that the Bukiba's infrastructure wasn't even hosted locally in Uruguay. It was relying on Amazon Web Services and Cloudflare.
Right, which means the physical servers processing the data and the actual point of unauthorized access were located in data centers in the United States or Canada.
So from a legal standpoint, that is a jurisdictional nightmare. Technically, the digital crime didn't even happen on Uruguayan soil.
Exactly. If the unauthorized access occurred on AWS infrastructure in Virginia, the proper protocol would involve the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, or MLAT process.
And what does that entail?
Well, the Uruguayan authorities would need to formally request logs from AWS through international diplomatic channels.
Which I'm guessing is not a quick process.
It's a slow, bureaucratic process that can take months. But Hector's point is that the authorities bypassed this entirely.
Because they wanted a quick win.
Yes. They treated a cloud-based intrusion as a purely domestic, localized incident because the physical body they wanted to arrest was sitting right there in Uruguay.
It suggests a complete disregard for the realities of borderless cloud architecture, just in favor of securing an immediate arrest.
And the consequences for that physical body are incredibly severe.
Yeah. Let's talk about Vlady's current situation, because he's an 18-year-old with no prior record, and he was hit with 6 months of preventive detention.
Which is a very harsh measure.
And he is being held incommunicado in a medium security facility. Now, in Latin American legal systems, preventive detention is typically reserved for severe flight risks or individuals who pose an imminent, violent threat to society.
Right, it's not meant for this.
Applying it to a nonviolent digital offense is a drastic escalation.
It is, and the situation is compounded by the status of his legal file, the Expediente. Gob reveals in the audio that the case file has been classified as confidential.
That is the most Kafkaesque part of this entire scenario to me.
It's terrifying, honestly.
How can defense counsel adequately represent a client facing a decade in prison for cyber terrorism if they are legally barred from reviewing the state's forensic evidence?
They can't. Gob is incredibly frustrated by this in the recording, stating they have no idea how his lawyer can mount a defense when there isn't a clear file detailing the specific IP logs or digital evidence linking him to the major breaches.
Because the evidence is locked away.
Exactly. Alberto Daniel Hill, drawing on his own analysis of the Uruguayan justice system, argues this confidentiality is a strategic mechanism.
Like a trap.
Basically. If the state lacks rigorous forensic evidence linking Vlady to the actual PampaLeaks exfiltration, classifying the file prevents the defense from exposing that lack of evidence in open court.
Oh, wow. So they hide the fact that they have nothing.
Right. And it is heavily utilized to force a juicio abreviado.
The abbreviated trial system. This is basically a plea bargaining mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Where the accused admits guilt in exchange for a negotiated reduced sentence, completely bypassing a full public trial.
Exactly. Hill outlines the psychological pressure of this system. You place an 18-year-old in a volatile prison environment, restrict his communication, threaten him with maximum sentences for aggravated cybercrimes, and then withhold the evidence against him.
It's designed to break the defendant down.
Yeah.
Until signing a blank check of guilt seems like the only rational way to survive the immediate trauma of the incarceration.
Yeah. The state secures its conviction, the public relations crisis is formally resolved, and the actual technical vulnerabilities that allowed the national database to be breached are never subjected to public adversarial scrutiny in a courtroom.
Which is the core systemic issue identified in our sources. And this brings us to a concept Hill introduces, which he calls the protocol of silence.
This is a really vital concept. It references a global secrecy index where Uruguay scores a highly concerning 9.7.
A 9.7 out of 10.
Yes.
Wow. A 9.7 rating indicates an extreme prioritization of institutional opacity.
Right. And in the context of national cybersecurity, this opacity is incredibly dangerous.
So how does this protocol of silence actually play out?
Well, Hill argues that when a massive breach occurs, the state's primary objective isn't remediation, it's not fixing the problem, it is reputation management.
So they just cover it up.
Exactly. The protocol of silence dictates a predictable response pattern. Initial denial, minimization of the data exposed, the rapid capture of a highly visible scapegoat to appease the public.
Which is exactly what happened with Vlady.
Right. And finally, the classification of the investigation to ensure the underlying architectural failures are never debated.
So they never actually fixed the broken locks. And while the state is dedicating its resources to prosecuting an 18-year-old OSINT scraper to protect its reputation, what is happening to the actual cyber threat landscape in the region?
Well, the real threat landscape is operating with near impunity.
Gob and Hector both stress this in the raw audio. They describe a thriving underground economy that is vastly more sophisticated than anything Vlady was capable of doing.
Yeah, Hector details his exploration of the cybercrime ecosystem in the region, specifically pointing to Telegram. We are no longer talking about isolated individuals in basements here.
Right, we're looking at massive syndicates.
Huge organizations.
He mentions carding rings operations dedicated to the bulk theft, validation, and sale of credit card data operating in Telegram groups with 20 to 40,000 active members.
40,000 members. Let that sink in.
It's insane. These are structured organizations utilizing ransomware as a service models, employing initial access brokers, and maintaining dedicated customer support infrastructure.
They operate like real corporations.
Yeah.
And Gob specifically distances his crew from a group known as the Mafia del Gentai.
Right. The media frequently attempted to link Gob and Vlady to the massive breaches of the Argentine National Registry, the RENAPER.
But Gob forcefully denies this. He attributes those exfiltrations to the Mafia del Gentai and their leadership.
He sounds pretty frustrated about it in the audio, too. He points out that the media and the state intentionally blur the lines between noisy hacktivists or vandals and these highly organized, financially motivated cartels.
Because it's just easier to arrest the noisy teenager, you know? True cartels like Mafia del Gentai utilize advanced operational security. They operate through Tor, they leverage bulletproof hosting in jurisdictions without extradition treaties,
So they are untouchable.
basically. And they launder their proceeds through complex cryptocurrency mixers. A domestic police force that is already struggling to understand cloud jurisdiction has virtually no capability to dismantle a transnational ransomware as a service syndicate.
So, as Hill argues, they just default to targeting the low-hanging fruit to project an aura of competence.
Exactly. And this dynamic is perfectly illustrated by the specific legal mechanisms used against Vlady, particularly regarding Law 19223.
Yeah, let's look at that because this highlights the hypocrisy perfectly. Vlady is facing charges of aggravated data violation under this law.
Right.
And what is the specific act that elevates this to an aggravated offense, according to the state's narrative?
Yeah.
Exposing the data of President Yamandu Orsi.
The state is arguing that accessing or publishing the president's personal data constitutes a severe threat to national security, which justifies the harshest application of the law.
But Gob points out the absurdity of this in the audio. The data in question, a photo of the national ID, the DNI number, is largely public information anyway.
Yeah, it's not a state secret.
Politicians' basic biographical data and ID numbers are frequently available in public transparency registries or campaign filings. Gob notes that in both Uruguay and Argentina, the photo of the document is essentially public domain.
So the sources suggest that elevating the automated retrieval of widely available or previously leaked data to the level of an aggravated national security violation carrying a potential 10-year sentence is a staggering overreach.
It implies the law is being applied not strictly to protect sensitive data architectures, but to punish lèse majesté, an offense against the dignity of the sovereign.
You embarrass the executive branch by highlighting that their data is just as exposed as everyone else's.
Right, so they throw the book at you. Which brings up a really interesting philosophical argument that Hector makes in the audio, one that I think we need to really scrutinize here.
Yeah, the free pen testing argument.
Exactly. He refers to the actions of these younger hackers, the defacements, and the OSINT scraping, as free pen testing.
Penetration testing being the legitimate industry practice where organizations contract ethical hackers to simulate attacks and identify vulnerabilities.
Right. And Hector's argument is that Vlady and Gob effectively provided an unsolicited free penetration test for the government. They highlighted that the digital doors were wide open.
And his point is that instead of thanking them and patching the vulnerabilities, the government arrested the messenger.
But I have to challenge Hector here.
Okay.
Calling unauthorized access and the scraping of citizen data free pen testing feels like a massive rationalization for illegal behavior.
That's a fair point.
Because professional pen testers operate within strictly defined scopes and legal contracts. You don't get to kick someone's door down, rifle through their filing cabinet, and then demand gratitude because you proved their lock was broken.
Your critique is entirely valid from a legal and ethical standpoint, and it is a debate actively happening within the cybersecurity community regarding hacktivism. However,
Go ahead.
the core of Hector's point, and the point Hill really underscores, is focused on the state's reaction. Regardless of the legality of the hackers' methods, they definitively proved that the state's infrastructure was highly vulnerable.
Right. The doors were unlocked.
Exactly. Hector argues that a responsible institution would acknowledge the technical flaw, remediate the vulnerability, and perhaps pursue proportionate legal action for the unauthorized access.
Instead of a 10-year sentence for cyber terrorism.
All right. But a state operating under the protocol of silence chooses to completely ignore the vulnerability. By classifying the file, coercing a plea deal, and burying the technical details of the breach, they ensure the broken lock remains unfixed.
Which brings the true danger into focus for you, the listener. Because if the government's only response to a breach is to deny its severity and silence the individual who exploited it, they are basically guaranteeing that the real threat actors, the 40,000-member carding rings, the ransomware as a service cartels, will eventually find that exact same vulnerability.
Oh, they absolutely will.
And when they do, they won't be defacing a web page to get attention.
Yeah.
They will be encrypting hospital databases, exfiltrating financial records, and extorting the state for millions.
As Hector asks in the audio, where is my confidential information safeguarded? As a citizen, can I sue the government for negligence in the handling of confidential information?
It's a good question.
When an institution scapegoats an 18-year-old for exploiting an architectural failure, they absolve themselves of the responsibility for creating that failure in the first place.
We've covered incredible ground today. We started with the state's triumphant announcement of capturing a mastermind, a narrative that quickly dissolved when we examined the raw dark web communications where the actual attackers admitted the teenager was taking the fall.
We looked at how OSINT tools like intellects are weaponized, highlighting the critical difference between finding a lost password and executing a sophisticated network breach.
And we analyzed the forensic fallacies of IP attribution and the jurisdictional complexities of cloud architecture that local authorities frequently just ignore.
We also examined the chilling effect of classified legal files and the coercive nature of the juicio abreviado system, framing it all within Alberto Daniel Hill's concept of the protocol of silence.
The ultimate takeaway from our sources today is that you are relying on these exact institutions to protect your digital identity. When a state prioritizes public relations over rigorous digital forensics, the vulnerabilities that expose your data remain completely unaddressed.
Right. Questioning the official narrative isn't just for internet sleuths. It's a requirement for digital sovereignty. A state that refuses to publicly analyze how it was breached is a state that is entirely unprepared to prevent the next one.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. If an 18-year-old leveraging public search engines can expose the profound fragility of a nation's digital infrastructure, and the government's primary defense mechanism is to lock that teenager away in a confidential legal black hole, who ultimately represents the greater threat to public safety? Is it the individual who points a flashlight at a broken system? Or is it the powerful institution that insists on turning off the flashlight, refusing to fix the locks, and leaving everyone's data sitting in the dark?